All right, let's get back out to the Progressive Insurance Hotline right now. Sponsored by Progressive, making it easy to bundle your home and car insurance. Love talking boxing all the time. Any excuse to talk about the sweet science. And, of course, who better than to bring on the best when it comes to the sport of boxing? A writer for Ring Magazine, Boxing Monthly, of course. And, well, make sure to watch his show, The Neutral Corner, on his own YouTube channel. It is the great Michael Montero. What's up, Mike?
Hey, what's going on, Dave? Thanks for having me back, man.
Well, first of all, the heavyweight division, we have some buzz going on with the big guys for the first time in about 20 years, with Andy Ruiz pulling off the upset and Deontay Wilder and King Kong Ortiz coming up with their rematch, and Tyson Fury looking pretty good against that German guy that nobody's ever heard of. And I like what I'm seeing right now in the division.
Yeah, we kind of got, well, I was going to say we got like a three-headed monster, but then Andy Ruiz came in and like upset the whole party, right? So now there's like this four-headed monster, and I like it, man. These guys are actually starting to fight each other, and, you know, with Anthony Joshua losing, I think that was actually a good thing for the sport because it shook everything up, and it shows you can't marinate a fight for too long, right? Because they were trying to marinate that fight between Joshua and Wilder, so maybe now that's going to speed up the process and get these guys all fighting each other, and I think that's better for the fans, right?
And, you know, for all the critics saying that Joshua, you know, has no heart and no guts and no stamina, he showed all of that when he fought Vladimir Klitschko. When he knocked Klitschko down, Klitschko came back and knocked him down, and he had to dig deep to come back and win that fight, and he won it late. So why couldn't he do it this time against Andy Ruiz Jr.? Is there a difference in his training routine? Maybe a little bit overconfident, maybe not in quite the shape he should have been going in?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's probably a combination of several things, Dave. I mean, for one, you know, Ruiz was a last-second replacement. So, you know, you're training for one guy, and then you get another guy with a different style. That's always tough. And then on top of that, I think Andy Ruiz was underrated and underappreciated. I told everybody, including you, I told you that this guy can fight. He's got hand speed. He had a good amateur career. You know, he's been there. He's been in the trenches. And he had fought Joseph Parker, who held a title, won a title in his fight against Andy Ruiz, actually. And Andy Ruiz barely lost that fight, and I think he learned a lot from that fight. Some of these guys learn and improve from losses. So I think Anthony Joshua maybe took him a little lightly, and then, you know, going in there against Ruiz, when they started exchanging, Ruiz just had the more fluid combinations. He's the more natural boxer. He's been doing it longer, punches and bunches. AJ's more like one punch, two punches at a time. That was the difference. But to go back to your earlier comment about AJ not having heart, you know, some of the critics saying that, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you mentioned this fight against Vladimir Klitschko, but then people forget against Andy Ruiz, he got up off the deck 4 times. You do not get up off the deck 4 times if you're, quote-unquote, quitting. I don't think that was a quit job at all. I think he was concussed, and the ref did the right thing stopping that fight. But he showed heart in that fight, getting up off the canvas several times. It's not as if he just folded under the pressure. And for what it's worth, I actually think AJ has a very good chance of winning that rematch.
Now, how does he win the rematch? Does he maybe kind of yardstick him and stick the jab in his face and you use the jab and kind of make it a boring fight and move around and win rounds that way? Or do you think he can come forward and fight the way he normally does and still win, but then he's coming into harm's way? He's getting into the mouth of the lion again, getting into Ruiz's power.
Yeah, Dave, if you look at the first 2 rounds of that fight between Joshua and Ruiz, Joshua was kind of sticking and moving, using his length, using his height, using the jab. He didn't look great, but he still won those first 2 rounds fighting intelligently. And then he actually dropped Ruiz, and then he just got kind of lazy and stupid and just started lunging in there with his chin up, and that's when Ruiz took advantage. But you're not going to like my answer to this. For him to win the rematch, Joshua has to fight a little more like Vladimir Klitschko, the way he fought after his early losses. Get smart. Use your natural tools. Use your height. Use your length. Use the jab. Anthony Joshua could win that rematch strictly off the jab if he stays smart.
You know, Andy Ruiz had some interesting comments this week with their rematch coming up against Anthony Joshua. He said he's going to do the same thing to him again, and he said he's going to get into much better shape and change his body around. I don't know why he'd want to do that after what was so successful, but he also said Anthony Joshua doesn't know how to fight. So that was an interesting comment.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of truth to that. I mean, some of these guys that get into boxing a little bit later on, they don't have. There's a difference between a boxer as an athlete and then a boxer as a fighter. Some guys are fighters first, athlete second. That's what I would call Andy Ruiz. He's a fighter first and athlete second. With Anthony Joshua, he's the opposite. He's an athlete first, a fighter second. I think that's what we saw when they got in the trenches in that first fight. But I do slightly disagree with Ruiz here. I think that Anthony Joshua has shown a fighter's heart in moments. We talked about that just a second ago. And I think that he can use his athleticism to keep Ruiz off of him so they don't get in the trenches. It'll be up to Ruiz to change that, to get inside that jab and make it a rough, tumble kind of fight. If it turns back into that kind of fight, he has a great chance to do it again.
Well, Deontay Wilder, I'm sure, was watching that very closely, and he fought Luis King Kong Ortiz, about a year ago, Mike Montero, and he got buzzed a couple of times. It looked like he was a couple of seconds away or maybe one more shot from getting knocked out himself that night, and we all know Ortiz is a dangerous fighter, and they got a rematch coming up, so I'm sure Wilder, after watching the Ruiz-Joshua fight, knows how much money and how much future there is to lose if he's not ready to go here in this rematch, because Ortiz is a very tough customer.
Ortiz is an experienced fighter, decorated Cuban amateur. The Cuban system, they've been pumping out great fighters out of that amateur system for decades. And he's a tough guy with good, decent power. He sets up his punches pretty well. The difference between Ortiz and Andy Ruiz is Andy Ruiz is in his physical prime. He's a young man still. Luis Ortiz is up there in age. He's, I think, in his 40s. I think they list him in his late 30s, but he's actually in his 40s.
They say 38.
We talked a minute ago about these Cuban guys. You just don't know about their age, right? I mean, you always add 5 years. But we talked a minute ago about Joshua's fight with Vladimir Klitschko. The difference between that fight and his fight with Andy Ruiz, Klitschko dropped him. Ruiz stopped him. And again, I go back to the age factor. Klitschko was in his 40s, coming off a 2-year layoff. Just wasn't in his physical prime. I see the same thing with Luis Ortiz. I think Wilder, if he fights smart, stays back, uses his length, I think he actually beats Ortiz in more dominant fashion this second time around than he did the first fight.
Michael Montero on the Progressive Insurance Hotline. Make sure you sign up for his YouTube channel and watch the Neutral Corner, also a writer for Ring Magazine and Boxing Monthly. Yeah, I stood next to Luis Ortiz, King Kong in L.A. at the press conference for Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. He's 50 if he's a day, Michael. This 38 stuff is nonsense.
yeah, he's up there. I don't believe the age they list this guy at. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact age they list him at, but I think it's 38. And there's
that's what they
no
say.
way. There's just absolutely no way.
Well, he was 38 once, so right about 12 years ago.
There you go. So that's all that matters. He'll just stick to that.
Mike, I think that Tyson Fury is the best heavyweight in the world. I know this tomato can he just knocked out, that's not much of a test, but to me, I thought he clearly won that fight against Deontay Wilder. Joshua was exposed a little bit. I don't think he would be dumb enough to get caught and come forward the way Joshua did. I think he would outbox Andy Ruiz as well. I think he's the best heavyweight in the world. What do you think?
Well, you're not alone, Dave. I sit on the Ring Ratings Committee and the ratings committee at Boxing Monthly magazine as well, and we both rated him number one. So we agree. But to be fair, it's kind of a 1A and 1B between him and Deontay Wilder. I agree with you that in terms of rounds, Fury beat Wilder when they fought last year, but those 2 knockdowns, Wilder's power kind of bailed him out. He was able to drop Fury. And for that, I was okay with the draw. The thing is, Fury had been inactive. He had ballooned up in weight after beating Klitschko a few years back. And he was still kind of rusty when he fought Wilder. Now, you just mentioned his win over Tom Schwartz, the German guy nobody had heard of before. Yeah, journeyman-level opponent, but Fury did what he was supposed to do against that level of opponent, right? Completely annihilated him, gets him out of there in 2 rounds, looks sharper. And I think he's going to do one more fight while Wilder fights Ortiz again, and these two should rematch early next year. By then, in theory, you're getting a sharper, more in shape, more focused version of Tyson Fury going up against Deontay Wilder. And, as a guy who's been to 1,000 fights, I usually am very, very good at predicting these things. I usually have a gut feel. I still don't know who to predict in that rematch. It's still 50-50 for me. That's what excites me about it the most.
Well, Michael, you talked about being inactive and ballooning up in weight like it was a bad thing. That's a positive for radio sports talk show hosts.
That's why you're the undisputed lineal champ, Dave.
Michael Montero from Montero on Boxing joining Dave Smith here at SB Nation Radio and SBNationRadio.com on the Progressive Insurance Hotline. All right, let's get to the lighter weights right now. Looking forward to Manny Pacquiao and Keith Thurman coming up. And I think we talked about this before, Mike. A couple of years ago, I would have thought this would be an easy fight for Thurman, who's a really good young fighter, good young welterweight, power in both hands, good boxing skill. But he had 22 months off with injuries, and he's been inactive, and Manny's looked a lot better lately. Now this one could be a toss-up. I think Manny's got a good chance to win this now.
I think, you can never count Manny Pacquiao out, right? He's an all-time great. He's one of the most dynamic athletes. I mean, not just fighters, but one of the most dynamic athletes of the last generation. So he certainly has a chance. What we don't know, we just talked about Tyson Fury being inactive, being a little rusty, getting sharper with each fight. Is that what we're going to get with Keith Thurman? He's had, you mentioned the layoff where he was injured. He had one fight, one comeback fight. He didn't look too good, but there was a lot of ring rust there. Did he knock off that ring rust? Is he going to look better and sharper against Pacquiao now that he got those rounds in earlier this year? That remains to be seen. You talked about Pacquiao looking really good lately. Some of that is probably matchmaking. You look at the guys he's fought, some good names, but they were a little bit past their prime. So it's hard to say with Manny. How's he going to look against a young guy, undefeated, Keith Thurman, in his physical prime? Yes, there's been injuries. Yes, there's been layoffs. But Thurman, I believe, is about 30 years old, right around there, maybe late 20s, but right around that age, still in his physical prime as a man. And Pacquiao, the senator, let's face it, he's getting up there in age himself. He's in his 40s. He is a senator. He's an actor, a singer. He does 5,000 different things. Boxing isn't the only thing he does anymore. So all things being equal, I look at this and I just have this gut feel that youth will win out. And I just see Keith Thurman eking out a decision victory in this one.
Now let's say
I'd love to be proven wrong, though, because if Pacquiao pulls that off, that's an all-time epic accomplishment. It really
absolutely. And if Pacquiao does pull this thing off and reaches back and finds a way to win here, I would imagine that brings back Floyd Mayweather, right? Because then Manny's got some heat. Manny's got a little winning streak going. Manny beat a welterweight champion, and now, they're not going to make the type of money they made the first time around, but they can still make more money fighting each other than anybody else. I think that brings Floyd right back if Manny wins this fight.
I absolutely agree, because it'd be all the things you said, plus Manny beating a guy that Floyd never fought. And that's the thing too. So now Manny would have a win over a guy, and he could say, "Look, Floyd, you didn't even fight this guy. These are these young guns, the kind of guys that you avoided in your prime when you were making all that money. I just went out there and beat one of them. So now I got the juice. Let's do this again." Yeah, you'd have a case for that rematch. And look, Manny left Top Rank and Bob Arum about a year or so ago, signed with Al Heyman and Premier Boxing Champions, PBC. And, of course, the first thing all of us thought when we saw that signing was, oh, man, they're setting up the rematch with Floyd. But Manny has to win to make that rematch legitimate, right? So he has to win against Keith Thurman. It's a tall order. I talked about the age and all those things, but Manny always has a shot.
And if Thurman wins, I think Sean Porter's going to be fighting Errol Spence, if I'm not mistaken, Mike Montero. Then Bud Crawford's out there. What's for Thurman? What's next for him if he wins this fight?
I think, so you mentioned Errol Spence and Sean Porter. They are going to fight, I believe, in September. It's not official yet, but, they pretty much have agreed to it in principle. I think it's going to be Fox pay-per-view. It's going to be later this year in the fall. The winner of that fight, you figure them and Keith Thurman fight early next year in the spring, and that's going to be a big fight for the number one position in the welterweight division,
well, Michael,
whoever it is. So, yeah.
Well, Michael, why wouldn't Keith Thurman fight Bud Crawford and then have the two winners fight? Didn't that make more sense?
Well, of course it makes more sense, Dave, but this is boxing. And, Terrence Crawford is with Top Rank, and he fights on ESPN. And for what it's worth, Bob Arum has reached out to the PBC several times to try to get that fight. He's mentioned recently something like a 45-45 per split, 45% to each fighter between Crawford and Spence, and the winner of the fight getting the remaining 10%. But if you're PBC and you're Al Heyman from a business perspective, they have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to welterweights. So they can kind of do this little tournament that they're doing in the welterweight division while Terrence Crawford gets older. And then when they get the winner, the last man standing in their little tournament, they could go up against an old version of Terrence Crawford. Big fight at that point. Win it.
Yep.
If you look at Floyd Mayweather, that's kind of what he did with Manny Pacquiao. Let's be honest.
Great stuff, Michael. Good talking to you again. Make sure you go to Montero on Boxing on YouTube and read him in Ring Magazine and Boxing Monthly. Great stuff, Mike. Talk to you down the road.
All right, Dave. Have a good one.
There he goes, Michael Montero on the Progressive Insurance Hotline.